Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So today we are starting a new sutta, a sutta that um, has significant amount of importance when it comes to the practice in its entirety. The sutta that we have chosen, or we are going to do, as all of you know, is the Suññata Sutra or Sutta, the link to which is available on the website under the Sutta section. So let's get to it, and we will explain it as we go. Yeah. So there are a number of suttas. There are a number of suttas that go into the elucidation of what Suññata is. What Suññata is. And there is no discrepancy between any of these suttas. There is no discrepancy. All of the sutras would, in the same way as the Abhidhamma does, point to Suññata being a quality which is experienced by a person when that person attains enlightenment. As a person who is a practitioner, this Suññata, or in English, this sense of emptiness, would be seen in a way of aspiration, or in rather also inspiration, aspiration as well as inspiration, in a way of molding and preparing the mind to experience a state or come into a state of exaltation, which we refer to as nirvana. So Suññata is an experience that an arahant, or a fully enlightened being, would be able to fully comprehend and understand. However, through modes and practices of vipassana, but not only vipassana, even in terms of jhana, we are able to not entirely, but partially experience these states of, or understand states of Suññata to a certain extent, not a full extent, but a certain extent, right? Now, let's go into why we think or what the sutta is saying, right? So page number 44. Page number 44. All right. The lesser discourse on emptiness. Abiding in emptiness. At one time, the Blessed One was staying in the mansion of Migara's mother. Now, Migara's mother, we know who is Migara's mother? The Vishaka. Vishaka was or was the foremost female disciple of the Buddha. Now, why is Visakha in certain aspects known or called to as Visakha? And why is she in other aspects known and called to as Migara's mother? Remember, Migara's mother is not her son's name, but is her father-in-law's name, right? Migara is the father-in-law, not the son, right? So how is it that Vishaka comes to be known as Migara's mother? This is because it is because of Vishaka, after becoming or marrying Migara's son. And Migara, although he was a wealthy, a very, very wealthy people, although he was very wealthy, he was also quite stingy. He did not like in sharing his wealth. He was not a generous person. And it was Vishaka who turned him to the Dhamma, or rather sort of, it's not right to say turned him to the Dhamma, but it is Vishaka invites a Buddha to the house, to their house, and and Migara listens in on what the Buddha speaks, and it is out of Migara listening to just what the Buddha was saying, Migara sort of, proclaims himself as a disciple of the Buddha. And Migara sort of offers himself as a student or a son of Vishaka, the daughter-in-law, just out of respect for the Dhamma entirely, right? Just out of respect for the Dhamma entirely. So Vishaka, this explains also, I mean, I think this is a good opportunity to also sort of understand, who the Buddha was. Now, Vishaka's monastery, Vishaka's monastery was situated uh, east of Savatthi, right? And on the west of Savatthi was Anathapindika's monastery, right? That is why it is called, Vishaka's monastery is called Pubbharama. Pubbha means east, right? East of Savatthi. And Anathapindika's monastery was west of Savatthi. So it was the other side of the city, right? And the Buddha spent almost 20 years residing between these two monasteries. He loved residing in these two monasteries, right? And most of his life, if one was to ask, where did the Buddha spend most of his life? It was actually between these two monasteries, right? He was very close to both Anathapindika and Vishaka, which then we can sort of use to discuss this sense of friendliness that the Buddha had. Vishaka, as I believe, as much as we would sort of relate to Vishaka and Anathapindika, the two foremost male and female disciples of the Buddha, as disciples, they were also very, very, very close confidants, right? And close friends of not only the Buddha, but also the Sangha, right? And Vishaka, as well as Anathapindika, both were very, very close to the Sangha, especially, of course, the Buddha, and also the young monks as well. The Sangha was literally, like Vishaka's children, really, right? That is the way she treated all of them. And I think we've all heard, or most of us might have heard, the stories where when Vishaka arrives, or the news of Vishaka's arriving reaches the monastery, all the young ones sort of, flock to the gates to sort of see, what wonderful gifts she's bringing in terms of sweets and snacks and, all of these things with the young monk's love. So, it also reminds us of, how it is right now, which is actually in a similar case, it does work in a very similar way, Also, when we sort of take Vishaka as a person, Vishaka was an enlightened being. She was a stream enterer. And Vishaka, being a stream enterer, she also had many children, right? She lived with her husband while supporting the family. She also was a person who was supporting and earning her own way to support the Buddha and the rest of the Sangha. Vishaka was wealthy on her own. She came from a very, very wealthy family. She had her own businesses. She had a lot of children who she mothered. And with all of this gives us a perspective of what enlightenment truly is, right? The fact that we might all be struggling to attain enlightenment through letting go, it seems that when it comes to people who've done it and studying the lives of people who have already done it, especially people like Anathapindika, Visakha, and even the kings, queens, all of these people who've done it at the time of the Buddha, there doesn't seem to be this infatuation with this aspect of letting go of everything, which we tend to have these days, right? Which we tend to have these days. There seems to be more of a value and a quality of understanding the reality of life rather than the sort of the aspect of living a simple life. Rather, the focus seems to have been more upon the fact of understanding the reality of life rather than sort of the physical aspect of living a simple life, which I feel like through cultures, traditions, and through the many, many years that Buddhism has existed, it has gone through a shift of sort of focus, really, right? So, shift of focus. So that is the story of Migara's mother, Vishaka. And also, Vishaka was a person who was very closely linked to solving the problems that would arise within the Sangha, right? Solving the problems that would arise within the Sangha. It was not only the monks who would sort of get involved, because Vishaka and people like Vishaka were very close to the Sangha, and also like mothers or fathers of the Sangha. Because of that reason being so, the Buddha welcomed or had Vishaka come in many aspects when solving issues regarding to the younger monks, when solving issues regarding the bhikkhunis. Vishaka, especially with regards to the bhikkhunis, Vishaka was always involved. In most instances, Vishaka was involved. So this explains a sense of Vishaka's sort of commitment towards Sangha. Also, the fact of the Buddha spending most of his time, 20 years of his life, living between these two monasteries, and it is mentioned in the commentary saying that the Buddha, he sort of shifted between the monasteries as he wished and as he pleased to, right? As he wished and as he pleased to. And the fact that the Buddha resided in these places also sort of explains what in the Tipitaka we know to be as Gochara Bhumi. Right? Now, Gochara Bhumi relates to a suitable location, right? Locating in a place where it is suitable for, of course, oneself, the Sangha, and for the dissemination of the Dhamma, which was fulfilled by the fact that there were people who were honestly committed to the Buddha and the teachings that the Buddha had to offer. Right? Teachings that the Buddha had to offer. We see a drastic aspect of Agochara Bhumi in the story of Mahinda. If you remember, Venerable Mahinda, yes, the same Mahinda who disseminated the Dhamma in Sri Lanka, right, did not visit Sri Lanka, knowing that it was not suitable for the dissemination of Dhamma. Right? Do you remember how long he waited? He waited until the present king passed, right? And a new king took reign. Why? Because he knew that the present king would not be supportive of the Dhamma, right? And the teaching of the Dhamma. So this Gochara and Agochara, you find practiced, or rather you find it to be a very important part of when it comes to making a decision as to where to live, right? Or where to sort of be in when it comes to the dissemination of Dhamma. Now, something that has really inspired me towards Pauk is whilst we have seen, usually when it comes to um, monasteries, when it comes to temples, we often would sacrifice a lot in order to keep a temple running, right? So even if there is no suitable person to sort of be sent to a specific location, wherever geographically it might be, right? If there is no sort of suitable, yet we would sort of send someone. However, that would be somewhat overseen. However, Paluxyado, because there were these two wealthy devotees who offered, because Paluxyado was so famous in Asia, there would be no place in Asia that Paluxyado could actually go to rest, because devotees would flock, and devotees literally flock, right? Literally flock to, you know, the temples. It's madness. It's absolute madness, right? I mean, you would think, okay, you have seen, being Sri Lankan, you might think, okay, I have seen piety. No, you have not. I guarantee you have not seen piety. The piety of these Burmese, it's insane. It's absolutely insane the way. And I think the Thais are also quite similar. The Thais are also quite similar. The amount of devotion and the way that they would sort of, you know, they would literally camp outside a monastery to get a viewing or to have an opportunity to meet with the monk. And I remember there was this monk. He was from Rakhine, but he was a very old, very senior monk. He was very, very frail, very skinny, very bony. Really, you know, um, he was a very strong meditation practitioner, and people sort of knew him to, or respected him as an arahant, right? And very soft spoken, and surely has a presence to him. And I remember um, visiting this monk. A devotee sort of, you know, took us to visit this monk, and the whole monastery it was so crowded with so many people. And we remember sort of going to it was breakfast time. And it was breakfast time. We had not had our breakfasts yet. However, it was the senior monk had started quite early to have breakfast. Why? Because all these people who had come, they had brought something, a dish, right? They had brought something, and you know, it's not like 20, 30 people. I'm talking in the hundreds. In the hundreds, just imagine. In the hundreds, people had brought a dish each, right? A dish each. And I remember Sayadaw, or the monk, was upstairs, and there were literally people passing each and every dish, right? Each and every dish, right, to this monk. They were not going also because there was no space. They were literally passing each and every dish through the cup, yeah, to the monk. And the monk would eat a tiny, a sort of a tiny bit from each dish. He would serve an absolutely tiny bit. He would serve from each dish, and he would sort of, you know, he would eat it. He would eat that, you know. So he wouldn't be eating a lot, but he would absolutely take a tiny bit from each and every dish, and he would eat one. So people are so Paul Sayadaw was offered this monastery in California. Um, in you know, a wealthy devotee from Singapore spent 2 million US, and he bought this block of land just for Pauk Sayadaw. And with there's a hut in the middle of the monastery, in the middle of that forest, and he offered this as Pauk Sayadaw's resting place, because specifically because the forest had a gate, so you could lock the gate to keep the devotees out. So it is absolutely crazy. And the amount, and Pauk Sayadaw would sort of be in this monastery, and the amount of sort of piety that people would have. However, even when Pauk Sayadaw was not able to live there, when he fell ill and he could not travel anymore, he, you know, he became, or sort of, he was advised not to travel while he was in Asia, so he was transported to Burma, and he's now in Burma. And this question arose: who are we going to send to California? Right? This devotee has spent 2 million, you know, of his, no collections, nothing. It was his personal money, right, on this monastery, and offered this monastery. Who do we send? And Pauk Sayadaw said, there's no one to send, right? And wholly because he did not care about the monastery. He did not care about the money. He did not care about anything. You know, if you know, I'm sure he knew if they really thought the money was an issue, they would have just sold the property. He was not concerned. The only thing that he was really concerned about is the risk of sending a monk who is not ready to a monastery in the West, right? And to me, that was amazing, because the people that I would have known as teachers would easily have sent someone, regardless of them being ready or not, However, because they would have put the value of the monastery ahead of the value of the monk or the bhikkhuni or whoever it is, right? So in that way, it is always, the practice, that sense of value that is always put on the individual in terms of the Dhamma. So let's come back to Vishaka and the Buddha. The Buddha spent most of his time between these two monasteries because he had a sense of liking towards these devotees, right? Because he felt a sense of home. I'm saying it in this way, but I would say more in a sense of suitability, right? In these places, we know in certain examples, we know that the Sangha would sometimes take alms from one palace or home, wherever it was, and they would go to Vishaka's house or Anathapindika's house, and they would sit there and then have their lunch there, right? What does this express? What does this express? I think we have to reflect upon. I'm not going to tell you because I think it's all open to perspective. However, I think these are things that we have to ponder about and think and reflect about when it comes to like and dislike, attachment and being, right? Because I feel like as we go through the practice, we've created this norm, this notion that we cannot like without attachment, that we cannot be in favor of something without a sense of craving or attachment or clinging to it, right? And I think it is in finding a proper understanding of these two parts, or even with regard to the word or the emotions connected to this, that gives us a proper resemblance of where our minds might have to be in associations, in eating, in working, in having families, in having friends. I think in positions, in all of those positions, in owning property, in buying something new, I think in all of those positions, I think whatever answer or result of reflection that you derive from that would apply to all of those aspects. Don't you think? Because in one way or another, this question about is it right to like something, or is it right to be in favor of something, comes along in almost all of the decisions that we make in how we sort of go forth in life, or really in anything day to day, right? So moving on. So Pubbharama was in the west, I'm sorry, in the east of Savatthi, and Anathapindika was in the west, right? And the Buddha would spend time between these two monasteries. For the people who came late, let's start again. At one time, the Blessed One was staying in the mansion of Migara's mother in the Pubbharama, the Eastern Monastery, page number 44, near Savatthi. Then, when it was evening, the Venerable Ananda rose from his retreat and went to the Blessed One. And after saluting him, said this to the Buddha: Venerable Sir, once the Blessed One was living amongst the Sakyans, where there is a Sakya town called Nagaraka. There, Venerable Sir, I heard and learned this from the Blessed One himself. Thus, even now, Ananda, I am one who is much devoted to the abiding in happiness. Much devoted to the abiding in happiness. Okay. So now this statement that is made
in emptiness.
I'm sorry, what?
Devoted in emptiness.
Devoted to abiding in emptiness. Okay. So this statement, which is made by Ananda towards the Buddha, this statement is recalled as a statement which is not existing in the Tipitaka, or not found in the Tipitaka, right? Not found in the Tipitaka. And there are certain statements of this sort which is found to be like this. And there are different schools of thought which would often prompt at something which is said but is not found, right? Then comes the question of whether everything that was spoken by the Buddha, word to word, was repeated by Ananda at the council, at the first council, right? So this is then sort of spoken of, or how sort of philosophers of this time sort of recollect this, is to say that yes, Venerable Ananda, because of the tradition of Theravada, and because the tradition of Theravada essentially started back from that time itself, the word Theravada assumes, or what it sort of means, is the fact that the Theras protecting the words of the Theras, right? Now, what does that mean? Protecting the words of the Theras, or adhering to the words of the Theras. This, what it means is that is the protection of, or keeping to, or accepting or adhering to those same words or traditions followed by the Theras of the time, right? Meaning what was repeated by Ananda, right? That is the orthodox tradition of Buddhism, is then about protecting and keeping it in the same frame and repeating it from generation to generation up until it was then put down on scrolls. It was after the Tipitaka was put down on scrolls that now later on scholastic productions of, or book writing on this, the Tipitaka was then done, producing all the books that we have today, right? Including the commentaries, the tikas, the tippanis, the anutikas, the anutippanis, and all of these sub-commentaries and commentaries, right? However, of course, it would be what it mentions is Venerable Ananda. This specific sentence is not found in the Tipitaka. Why? Because it was later resolved, or this specific thing was resolved by this sutta. Hence, the question is answered in clear, in full. Hence, there was no purpose to repeat that part, but what was repeated at the first council was what Ananda, or what was specifically taught as full, complete teachings, right? So that is what is mentioned within the study, or what has been mentioned within the study of, or how or why it would be so. So let's move on, right? Have I heard this correctly? Have I heard this correctly? Have I heard this correctly? Grasp, learn this correctly, attain to this correctly, remember this correctly. Certainly, Ananda, you have heard it correctly, grasped it correctly, learned to it correctly, remembered it correctly. As before, Ananda, so do I now often abide in emptiness. As before, Ananda, so do I now often abide in emptiness, right? Often abide in emptiness. The perception of the forest, right? The perception of the forest. That part will be, that is what really this sutta is all about. What is emptiness? How do we attain to it? Right? What modes of practice should we be practicing to attain to it, right? And as we go on, we'll discuss further, right? The perception of the forest. Ananda, just as this mansion, Dil, could you read this, please? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Page 44, the perception of forest. Ananda, just as this mansion of Megara's mother is empty of elephants, cattle, horses, and mares, empty of gold and silver, empty of the gathering of women and men, and there is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness, unity, dependent on the community of monks. So too a monk, not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of the forest. His mind plunges into that perception of forest, brightens with faith, becomes steady, and is resolute. He understands thus whatever disturbances, disruptions there might be on account of the perception of village, there are none here. Whatever disturbances there might be because of the perception of people, there are none here.
That's enough, Dale. Thank you. Right. The perception of the forest, right? Now, what would a forest usually, what does a forest, um, what does a forest insinuate? What does a forest represent?
A collection of trees or a collection, a group of people which are all sort of behaving together like one without being separate, like a group of monks.
Mhm. Okay, okay. What else? What else could it possibly represent?
Nature.
What about the animals in there?
Okay, the animals.
And the nature that is a part of nature.
Okay, nature. Okay, part of nature. Anything else? What does a forest represent? If one is to look at a forest in its entirety, anything else? So we have animals, we have nature, we have a collection.
Small creatures.
An ecosystem,
It's oneness, collective.
unity, ecosystem on its own.
An ecosystem. Okay, ecosystem is good. Yeah.
It's the oneness, because it's collective.
We got the oneness deal. We've got the oneness already.
And the coolness and the nice breezy, cool
Yeah.
atmosphere.
Sure. What else? We've got a
Beauty of nature.
beauty of nature. Okay, and
Can it represent life and the cycle of life?
absolutely. Yeah.
And also emptiness, it's to say in a calm way.
Okay. So actually, when Damsri, you want to say something as well?
Silence in the forest.
Okay. Yes.
And it gives an opportunity to have solitude if we want.
Okay.
Also creepy.
Lots of trees.
No, creepy or sort of, you don't know what we will get sort of. Yeah.
Did you say Preeti?
No, creep. CREEPY. Creepy.
Creepy. Wasn't expecting that. But yes, okay.
And solitude.
Solid. So actually, all of you, when it comes to the perception of the forest, right? When it comes to perception of the forest, it reminds us of something that is entirely not within our grasp and control. It is there, right? So ecosystem, the creatures, the animals, everything in terms of nature, in terms of something which operates by its own laws, right, which are universal, right? That is what we here in this case, what we sort of, we look at what the question that we often ask when it comes to this specific is, what does it represent? Right? What does it represent? Because we find that it is spoken of in the tense of, with sort of parables and examples. So let's go on and see. Ananda, just as this mansion of Megara's mother is empty of elephants, cattle, horses, Mars, empty of gold and silver, empty of the gathering of women and men, and there is only this non-emptiness, namely the oneness, unity, dependent upon right? Dependent on the community of monks. Dependent on the community of monks. So too, a monk not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of forest, attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of the forest, nature, right? The natures that are existent, arising and passing away, the intrinsic qualities of all of these things around us, right? Although we can see them individually, we can also see them collectively, right? In unity on its own almost, right? However, we can individually sort them out as well. We can say, okay, this tree is this kind of a tree, right? It is this tall or this stout. It can be the creatures, and we can differentiate the creatures from one creature to the other, male, female, type, all of these big, small, fast, slow, venomous, not, all of these things, right? They are individually differentiable as well as it can be seen as a whole in its own. Now, when we go on to what attends to the oneness dependent on the perception of ours. Now, what is this oneness? That is, what do you think this oneness is? Anyone? Pushpa? Any idea what this oneness might be insinuating at?
Would I say silence?
Silence, okay. Okay. Devika, yes, you can unmute yourself.
It's calm because of the solitude. You feel the oneness. You can be very calm and
Okay, okay.
Non-duality.
no hindrances.
Non-duality, okay. No hindrances, okay. What does that represent then in the practice?
Oneness.
Oneness.
Interdependent of each other.
One-pointedness, a collectivity, the four.
Right. Yes, it is one-pointedness. The one, so it's actually referring to samadhi, right? Samadhi is what we in often this sense of oneness, this in terms of ekagata, right? Ekata, I think, is the word which is used here. Oneness is ekata. Ekata refers to the state of mind which is focused upon one place, right? Focused upon one place, one object. Now, what are the practices which focuses on one place, one object?
Samatha practices.
Samatha practices. Yeah, samatha practices. Samatha practices focuses on one place, one object, isn't it? Is it only samatha practices though?
Vedananupassana.
Vedananupassana.
In pain only then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So literally then we know there are different types of samadhi, right? But really what we say is, although we might say different types of samadhi, right? We are referring to really different ways that same samadhi arises. And we know that samadhi, or the sense of oneness, can arise from both samatha and vipassana, right? Both samatha and vipassana. However, right, in this sutta, as we go along, we will understand what is it referring to as a sense of oneness at this stage of practice with regard to suññata, right? With regard to suññata. Let's go on, right? Now, his mind plunges into that perception of forest. His mind plunges into that perception of forest, brightens with faith, becomes steady, and is resolute, right? His mind plunges, right? Now, if we go down to that footnote, which we have there, number 31, right? I like the way that it is explained there, right? Plunges, pakandaki, pakandati, right? Rejoices in finds pleasure or satisfaction in, he takes to, right? He takes to. His mind plunges into the perception of forest, brightens with faith, becomes steady and resolute. Now, what is going on in that mind there? What is going on in that mind there? What is happening at that time when the mind is now, when it uses a word such as plungers? What kind of sense is it talking about?
Jhanas.
Jhanas, yes, yes, jhanas, but to allow for the jhanas, it's talking about something before the jhanas as well, don't you think? When it says, now remember, plungers, it is in that process. It's not talking about something which has already happened. It is talking about a process which is happening.
One-pointedness.
Is it got trouble?
Devika, what did you say? Sorry?
I said one-pointedness. When you're plunging in, you are directing your mind into that particular thing. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Then I thought you get.
Padma, how about you?
Is it change of lineage? It's in my mind, change of lineage.
Can be, absolutely good. Is a change of lineage. But let's question.
He rejoices because you plunge into a pool with some anticipation or something, looking forward to it. Not like when you're, people who love to jump into water.
No.
Yeah, a sense of okay, yes. I mean, that's a really nice example, Dale. I mean, okay, for example, we would love to jump into water, but we jump into water with a sense of confidence. We know we won't get hurt. We know that there would be no danger. However, if it is a stream or a river, we are a bit more cautious than it is if we are jumping into a pool, which we know is a controlled environment. We know there are no rocks or anything, or water snakes or anything of the sort, right? We jump most freely into a pool of that setting. Just imagine that sort of a mind in that sense, right? A mind which is completely comfortable, right? And then we have this word, the meaning of the word of pakhandati, right? To be rejoices in, finds pleasure or satisfaction in, it takes to, right? Those are the words that we have describing this motion of pakhandati, right? So almost in, like Padma said, with the right terminology, this motion of change of lineage, this motion of that. Yes, it is true. It in a sense of complete transformation towards the object, right? This sense of complete transformation towards the object. I think අරමුණට සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම නැඹුරු වීමක්. Almost magnetically pulled towards it. Because why? You're so confident. It is all as if, hugging your mother or your father, you're going to be hugged back. You have no doubts, you have no sort of qualms about it at all, right? In a sense of that sense of acceptance, that is important. Yes, Devika, you're right. It is talking about one-pointedness, right? However, we have to understand what causes that sense of one-pointedness. That sense of one-pointedness is caused by that unshaking sort of unshakable sense of convincing that the mind is now going through. Rather, now the mind is transformed and moved and magnetically almost pulled towards that object because you know it to be absolutely true to you.
Yes.
That sense, That sense is what we, or the Sutta is rather talking about. And now what is it plunging towards? Into that perception of the forest, right? The next part is also important. Brightens with faith, right? Brightens with faith. Plunges into the perception of nature or the forest, right? Brightens with faith. Now we often, when we practice vipassana, when we practice any sort of meditation, right? We have, or we are taught and we have gone through this, we still don't do it completely or entirely, right? The moment that you come, let's take, for example, Anapanasati, and you do Anapanasati breathing meditation for a period of an hour. And during that period of an hour, you experience different variants of samadhi, you experience different things. You might experience light, you might experience difficulties in sitting, you might experience pleasure, you might experience pain. You might go down memory lane, you might be losing the breath, you might be having the breath, you might be experiencing the body as a breath, you might be experiencing the body of the breath, you might be experiencing nothing at all. Regardless of whatever it is that you experience, we do not come out of the meditation. A serious practitioner does not come out of meditation haphazardly. Rather, a meditator would reflect upon what has happened during that time of sitting or time of meditation. It is during that process of not evaluation, but rather reflection, right? But rather reflection that one is able to now focus on. For example, let us say you have specific thoughts arising, hinting towards the arising of aversion, and you have this predominant emotion predominant in your sort of stream of thought, right? In your stream of thought through your practice. In reflecting and realizing this part, what you then realize is the fact that you have something to now work on, anger, right? In similar ways, when it comes to polishing up technique, that is done through that reflection time, where now you determine to do it in a different way, or you know where your focus should be, right? In jhanic practice, or the practice of jhana, this time is very important. This time of reflection is very important. When this reflection or this way of reflection develops, we call it the 5 ways of mastery, right? And one of the 5 ways of mastery is reflection, right? The way that one is able to reflect upon what jhana, the quality of the jhana, how the jhana was, impediments to the jhana, disturbances to the jhana, all of these things. Because remember, a jhana is not always 100% pure. It can have moments of weakness. It can have moments of profound bliss and happiness. How you get rid of those impediments, how you get rid of those sort of unnecessary pause in your jhana is through that time of reflection, which is important. Right? Which is important. Now let's move ahead. Brightens with faith, right? Brightens with faith. When one, through that reflection, right? This reflection also helps in that motivation to keep on to the path, right? Remember that this faith is panya. We know this. We do not have to remind ourselves that faith, every time that it is mentioned, it is really referring to panya, right? This faith, this shraddha, which a predominant part of it is prajna or panya, wisdom. Remember, how does wisdom operate? Let's go back to our chittas. I'm sorry, those of you, I think most of the people here are anyways are Abhidhamma students, but to those of you who aren't, when we where does Shraddha arise? Trihetuka kusala moola,
Yes.
right? Trihetuka kusala moola karma. What does that mean? A consciousness which is with non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. That is what allows us to go into deeper states of wisdom, awareness, nirvana. All of the prepping work is done through Mahakusala, Sobana Sadharana or Upekha Sadharana, Upekha Sobana Sagata, Somanasa Sagata or Upekha Sagata, Jnana Sampyutta. Those consciousnesses which are with knowledge. Right? Now, we know that there are consciousnesses, regardless of whether it is equanimity based or as a sense of feeling, equanimity based or happiness based, it has to have that aggregate of jnana, panya, right, which fulfills the order of the three kusala roots or the wholesome roots. Now let's go to our meditation. When we now, no, let's go to a pinkama or act of meritorious performance, act of merit. You ask your son or daughter, for example, to go and let's say take the food that you prepared for the monks, or take whatever, take it to the monastery, or the food that you prepared for an orphanage to take it to the orphanage, or whatever it is, some easy act of not easy but act of merit, a simple act of merit. The son or the daughter, because you said so, she takes it or he takes it and goes, gives it to the monks, and then comes back, doesn't really think about it. I'm doing what my mother says, or I'm doing what my father says, right? Simple, right? Now, is that jnana sampyutta or is that jnana vipayutta?
The mother has, the person who prepares.
Jnana vipayutta.
Correct, Pushpa. Jnana vipayutta, right? No doubt about it, isn't it?
Yes.
Jnana vipayutta. We know this because there is no sort of, I'm doing it, probably I don't want my mother to shout at me, so I'm doing it. Right? Jnana vipayutta. For the sake of doing it, it is done. Now let's think about the time when we come out of our meditation. Right? Now, remember what or how you go into your meditation, and how you come out of your meditation. The two different processes. It's not one big stretch, right? It is not one big stretch. It is two different processes. How is it two different processes? Because now the mind to meditate and the mind to come out of meditation or to awaken is different. The mind to meditate might be promoted or might be sort of, okay, if we say something like this, for the sake of example again, if we say something like, okay, I've done it yesterday, let me do it today as well, right? Or I need to keep my streak on, right? I need to continue my streak, right? Now let us say something like that, which is often something very practical, isn't it? Okay, I've been meditating every day for the past so many, so I want to continue this, right? I want to continue meditating. Now, in terms of jnana, of course, there is a certain weakness there, right? We can't say that it's completely not there, right? However, there is a certain weakness there, right? There is a certain weakness there. When it comes to now coming out, now Shraddha is Panya. Panya is Jnana Sampyutta. Jnana Sampyutta is this reflection of action which is done, or this prompting of action, not prompting, sorry, this reflection of action which is done as or due to the reasons or why one commits to that specific action, thought or whatever it is, right? That when it is missing, is there Shraddha or not? It can't be there. Clear? right? When there is lack of reflection, there is lack of jnana. When there is lack of jnana, when there is lack of jnana, there can't arise panya. When there is no panya, there is no shraddha, right? So what is enlightening, or sort of, I'm sorry, Kingsley, your mic, you unmuted your mic. Do you have a question?
I'm sorry. No,
No question.
not now.
Okay, okay. So, so now when there is no shraddha, remember now the shraddha, as we spoke about, I think during the Abhidhamma class or during the meditation, this word shraddha is one of the least used words in the Tipitaka, right? This word shraddha, without any doubt, refers to panya. It is not, or it has nothing to do with sort of faith because I am a Buddhist, right? It has everything to do with faith because knowing the truth of what I am practicing. This knowing of truth of what I am practicing does not arise because your mother believed in it, or because your father believed in it, or because a mass population believes in it. It doesn't really matter. That is not what commits to the true word of faith that is mentioned within the teaching, especially in teachings as profound as those which refer to or teach us the path towards enlightenment, right? This Shraddha wholly is referring to this wisdom towards the understanding of the workings of nature, anicca, dukkha, anatma, fuel towards reducing your time in samsara, not extending it. Right? That is a very, yes, Miri.
Sorry, Bhante, can I just ask? There are sort of, I thought there were 3 types of Shraddha where you have, you know, this initially when you don't really know whether it's helpful, yeah, and that you go, and then the one that you're talking about where you practice and you realize actually there is something in this, and then you develop your faith and it gets more, and then the unbroken faith once you actually, you know, have achieved stream entry or whatever. So that initial one hasn't got the knowledge necessarily, does it? You don't have knowledge necessarily?
Well, first of all, Miri, Shraddha mainly is categorized into 2. Amulika Shraddha and
Akaravati.
Akaravati Shraddha. Thank you.
And the last one is Achala, yeah.
Achala Shraddha. No, the last one is a late addition. Miri.
Is a late addition, oh I see, okay.
The last one is a late addition, right? The main 2 types of Shraddha is Amulika Shraddha and Akaravati Shraddha. Akaravati Shraddha, right? Akaravati Shraddha is Shraddha, Miri. In Buddhism, Shraddha always has panya. Now, let's go to the Abhidhamma, right? Now, just because, now let's say, let's take Jnana Sampayutta, will never arise just because your parents have taught you to be respectful. It will not arise just because you are forced to believe in something. It will always arise. It will always arise prompted by a certain knowledge which says that your actions are correct, right, and wholesome, or something of that sort, right? It is with that sense of, even if one is to sort of say, okay, let me meditate, those fueling factors of that meditation links to wisdom. Right? Shraddha, in any sense, when we look at the teachings, we know, when we look at the consciousnesses, Miri, we know it will have to rise with wisdom. Or else we know, this is clear, or else we have the word bhakti in Hinduism, which does not exist in Buddhism. Right? Wholly because we completely believe in the fact that Shraddha in Buddhism towards the teachings, towards the Buddha, towards the Sangha, towards all of these things should arise with wisdom. And we know that when in any type of good, regardless of whether it is towards a Sangha, regardless of whether it is towards your family, your children, animal, to nature, to all of these things, any type of good you do in thinking that you are doing some sort of good to these beings is done with some sort of wisdom, right?
Oh, thank you, Bhante. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
I mean, relate it. We have to relate it. The Achala Saddha is a later addition that we find, right? That I will give you the reference maybe next week, Miri, if you remind me, right? If you remind me through the week, I'll find the reference for you. But Achala Saddha is not found in many of the sutras that talk about Shraddha, right? But we do find Achala Shraddha spoken about in a lot of Dhamma talks, and referred to usually as well, which is seen as or understood to be a commentarial addition. Then we have, for example, Dukkatupanishaya Shraddha, right? Then where is Dukkatupanishaya Shraddha come, which is a Shraddha which arises, because of the experience of dukkha. Right? Because of the experience, for example, I have lost a loved one. This hurts. Why have I lost him? Now that's a question that we often hear. That is Dukkatupanishaya Shraddha. Right? Because of suffering in the world, we arouse a sense of Shraddha. Again, that all fall under Akaravati Shraddha. All of that falls under Akaravati Shraddha. Right? Akaravati Shraddha. Okay. Devika, you had something to ask?
No, I was just thinking, not thinking, I just want to ask you, always like what we do about the faith we have in Buddhism, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, Achala Saddha, you say, like unwavering Saddha in Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. So that is why we are Buddhists, and that's why we are devoted to what we do, and wanting to do the meditation, to wanting to, eradicate all these things and think about ultimate nirvana. So that is also saddha, isn't it? To reach that tununuan kereyati saddhaving, like we.
Absolutely.
Go. So that's what I want to ask you.
Yeah. So in books, I think I have also found many different sort of breakdowns of Shraddha and where Shraddha arises from. So, but if we are referring to the main teachings, then we will have to know that the main teachings holds two types of Shraddha specifically, that is Amulika and Akara. All the rest fall under all the rest that fuel some sort of inspiration towards the practice will all fall under Akaravati Shraddha. Akaravati Shraddha. Now, coming back to the Sutta, try to get through at least the first page.
Yes.
All right. Brightens in faith. Brightens in faith, becomes steady and resolute. This is important. Brightens in faith, becomes steady and resolute. Right? And becomes steady and resolute. Here, remember, the steadiness does not arise, again, in the traditional sense of this. We are specifically talking about a practice. A practice now which has been followed, that is mentioned by following the word pakhandati, right? Which is that sense of plunging, right? Plunging, you plunge, you don't plunge into a pool of fire. You don't plunge into a pool of lava. You plunge into something that brings you happiness. You plunge into, if you are wholeheartedly doing it, of course, right? That's you plunge into something which is good, something that you completely accept. Now that sense of brightens with faith, right, is important for the mind to achieve a state of stability where it is talking about that sense of purification of the processes of absorption, which allow processes of mind, which allows the mind to become steady upon a certain object. That steadiness, remember, this brightness with faith is important because it doesn't go from perception of the forest and directly into, this steadiness. There has to be a sense of, telling yourself, this is the right thing to do. This is the right path to follow. And that arises through a wisdom-based reflection which arouses this sense of lighten, this light of shraddha, faith, conviction towards the practice, commitment towards the practice, to such an extent where you have no qualms or doubt about it. However, you are moved and you know that to be true. That is why, remember, I've told you before, when you are in a jhana, you know you are in a jhana. Right? When you are enlightened, you know you are enlightened. You do not have doubts about it. Right? That is because when a person comes to that sort of sense, that place, this sort of brightens with faith, that sense of change of lineage. That is almost a taste and experience on its own with regards to the experience or the movement of mind that has happened, that almost metamorphical experience that has happened from you being a mundane person based on mundane sort of livelihood and manners into something which is now Arya. But here it's specifically referring to that which moves us towards a jhanic bliss, right? And resolute, completely fixed. There's no changing. You are committed to that, right? He understands thus. Right? Whatever disturbances, disruptions, right? Disruptions or discomfort, there might be on account of the perception of the village. There are none here. What is the perception of the village? What do you think this is? Or what does a village represent? Right? What does a village represent? Pushpa, what do you think, Pushpa?
A community.
A community, okay. And what follows a community? What else? A village. Remember, I think we know this. We often say, Eka Deva. No, one person lives like a Brahma, two people live like deities, three people live like a village. Remember? Yes, have I got that right, Damsiri? Yeah. So three people live like a village, right? It is often something we say in Sri Lanka, isn't it?
So it's a community.
Bad, different types.
Yes, a community. And what else? Hemamali? Lettuce, you can just Sujata, Samantha, Shanta, all of you all can, add your perspectives of what a village would represent. Lucky.
Lots of activities.
Lots of activities. Okay, lots of activities.
Free place.
Lots
of freedom.
Lots of freedom. Okay.
Living lives of their own, not bothered by the government interfering.
Relaxed
Interaction. Lots of
interaction. Okay, who said that?
Relaxed.
I did.
Atmosphere. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lot of interaction. Lucky, what did you say?
Relaxed atmosphere. People are relaxed, unlike in a town or city.
Okay.
It's a supporting each other.
And have identity as well.
Identity. Okay.
There are lots of defilements, liking and not, and all these opposites. So it's a haphazard mix of birdling, which have got liking and disliking and different interactions, which are haphazard. They are not focused.
Yes. So many things.
Supporting each other.
Anything else?
Supporting each other. Supporting each other.
Okay. Hemali?
Supporting each other.
You said okay. That was okay. Okay.
People have their own houses.
I hear Hemali's voice, so I don't know what it sounds like sometimes.
People have their own houses.
Sorry, Kingsley, yes?
Yeah, people have their own houses, living with their families, the children, old and young, and the entire family set up, and their day-to-day needs, hospitals, shops, and whatever
Yeah.
you need. That is a complete community, your road networks.
Yeah.
And
The conventional life, I think, it's a conventional life there.
yes, indeed, yes.
Like, I mean, all
Bante,
said,
Bante, shall I say something? It's a gossiping.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ishanta, please go ahead. You have
I said,
Diversity,
gossiping.
gossip.
Bhante, diversity.
Diversity.
Yes, diversity. Yes,
Diversity.
that's who said that, please.
I would say
Controversy.
Because trainees or Shakers were focused on one purpose. They're just diverse group of people.
Le-
Padma, you wanted to say something?
I think of controversy and fights and all sorts of
Yes, what are these
negative things.
about
Last,
unity and harmony?
last,
Village. On your side, Sujata, when you unmute your mic.
Swamigal sir, can I say something? I can only say it's a big mess. A village.
Yes, I mean, of course. The thing is, I think here, when all of what you say are different things, isn't it? Right? There are different aspects that a village can be taken in. There are different ups and downs, unity, the other part of unity, disharmony, everything. That's exactly what the perception of a village is, right? The fact that nothing is constant, the fact that there is such a difference between these sort of almost chaotic in nature, right? Almost chaotic in nature. And chaotic why? Chaotic by means of the variation of emotions, the differences of emotions, difference of heights of experience and the lows of experience that one would experience in or with a village. Right? As long as, so in this perception of village, what then it is referred to is when one is attached or works with that perception of village, right? Works with that perception of village is you are attached, almost linked to a mind that fluctuates all the time. From highs to lows, lows to high, highs to lows, lows to high, right? Almost impossible in a way. Almost impossible in a way to sort of have that sort of state of mind. I mean, I think, being within or being people who have lived within social circles and being a part of groups and, all girls associations and all boys associations and Sinhala Sabhas and, all of these things. Is there ever a meeting where you say, oh, what a lovely meeting we had? Very rare, isn't it? Right? You would often come out of the meeting thinking, oh my gosh, why am I even here?
Yes.
or some sort of drama, some sort of fluctuation of mind, and that is not specifically just with that sort of group or together. That's the sense, that is what a group is, the fluctuations. That is the nature of it. That is why it is said, three people live like a village, because there will always be different opinions. There will always be differences in the patterns of thinking. There will always be sort of someone who is going through something else, right? Which is not necessarily good or bad, which is just the fact that your mind will have to now keep up with this. Hence, a hindrance to a kata, a kagata. Right? That is what it's not to say a village is bad. No. It does not, the Dhamma does not say that. What it says is, however, it is a burden to the cultivation of a kagata. Right? That is the perception of the village. Right? That is the perception of the village. So, whatever disturbances there might be on account of the perception of the village. Now, disturbances, this is the first time that we are seeing the word discomfort, disturbance, right? On account of one thing, that's a perception of village, right? That is the life and world that we all live in, really, right? Because of that, there is a disruption to what? Ekagata. But in this state, there is nothing. In this state of practice, there are none of those disturbances. That is emptiness.
Oh, yes, Swaminathan, understood.
Right? That is emptiness. Almost, I think we can draw parallels in a way of when we develop the jhanas, which we will come into now. You know, remember we spoke about that pattern of developing from the arupa jhanas? You know, when we sort of get rid of the infinite space, or rather go into the infinite space, the space, we get rid of that nimitta, where we are then able to go into that infinite space. That is emptiness. That's not the only emptiness, don't get me wrong. That is not the only emptiness, but that's emptiness. Right? It's not the fact. It's not the fact. Now, I want you to ask me questions if you have any doubts. I will try. I'm also unable to explain this entirely and completely to the dot, obviously, as you might understand. However, to the best of my efforts. However, this is not referring to the nature of voidness in each and everything, because how can our poor minds relate to the nature of voidness in each and everything? It's almost impossible. Even when it comes to the development of metta bhavana, right? We know in the practice of metta towards jhana, what do? We focus on one person in each of the four categories. What are the four categories? First, a person who you respect. Second, a person who is a friend. No, is a friend. Then it's a person who is an unknown person. No? The basic Joe down the road, whatever, whoever it is, unknown person. Then it is a person who is an enemy, right? We go through this, and who do we select? A lot of people. No, we select one person. Why? Because it is through that one pointedness of that person, that one pointedness that we develop even through the metta, that we are able to go into the metta jhanas. You see that, right? I mean, for me, if I am even if I am to sort of take a group, I would visualize that in a way that it is almost triangular, right? Meaning it is as if even the world would be rather triangular, where my base of focus or point of focus would be that first part of the starting of that triangle, right? Almost in a way that I would assume that through focusing on that first part, I am now sort of focusing on the rest. But in the Vishuddhimagga, it is explained that this is the way that one should be doing it, because of jhana is possible because of the development of ekagata, right? Because of the development of ekagata. Now, as we go on, the perception of the village, and because the perception of the village is no longer there are none of those disturbances here. The disturbances referring to, and none here, please, if you have the paper there, or note that to be, that is referring to emptiness, right? None here. Whatever disturbances there might be, because of perception of people, there are none here, right? There are none here. So again, with the perception of people, when we take people individually, again, there is nothing here, right? Now the defilements, people, everything that we say, I think I was speaking to Noeline yesterday, and we were speaking about gossiping, and what she was saying is, of course, that they are so much into Dhamma now that they are, the time of gossiping has almost sort of finished, and they only talk Dhamma. However, I was explaining to her that why this sort of aspect of gossiping is so dangerous to the practice, and this is not really about. It is not just about how sort of very low gossiping is, because gossiping is not a very good thing really. It is a very low thing to do, a very petty thing to do. And the Buddha, he says, when a person determines in his life, I want to attain enlightenment, from that very day of determining to attain enlightenment, if the person is nurtured and nourished with the right intentions and right movements of mind, then from that day onwards, the person will not be protecting or living just by the Panchasila. He will now start, on that very day, start protecting the Ajiva Attamaka Sila. Right? What is the specialty now? Some people say, I mean, this is what I was taught when I was younger, trying to become a Buddhist and understanding Buddhism is, what to the question, why is it that, the three parts of the Ajiva Attamaka Sila relating to Samma Vacha, why is it not there? So people often say, no, it is already included in Musavada. It is actually not. It is not included in Musavada. Right? The three parts, it is a more refined sense of behavior. It is a more refined sense of behavior, refined aspect of behavior. And the Ajiva Attamaka Sila is one which is then protected by one who is committed with the right heart towards Nibbana. Right? And this is not to say, don't take this in a way where a person would be like, oh, would be like Musavada, Veramani, and Pisuna Vacha, Parusa Vacha, Sampapalapa. It's not, that's the tradition and culture, right? What is referred to when it is said by the Buddha, that person takes on the Ajiva Attamaka Sila. Remember, though, back in the day, a person didn't sort of say Musavada, Pisuna Vacha, Parusa Vacha, all of these things. That is a culture. What people did was determine, I'm not going to do this. This is not the way that is suitable for my practice. That is not the way that is suitable and respectful towards the life of Aryas. That is what the determination was about. That is what the determination was about. And when the Buddha says, from that day onwards, the person protects the Ajiva Attamaka Sila, the Ajiva Attamaka Sila is a natural, or almost instinctive decision that is made, almost maybe even unprompted at to certain extent, where now a person is like, no way in hell am I doing that. It is almost to that extent instinctual, right? It is almost as if a person who understands or comes to understand the karma of killing decides from that day, oh my gosh, I'm not going to kill anyone, right? Not in terms of taking up sila, but now a person has made a decision, I am not going to do this. When a person knows, oh my gosh, how much a certain thing is a damage to one's body, a person is like, oh, I'm not going to do that. Right? When a person knows how fire burns, and we have all burnt ourselves, we are not going to go and put our hands into the fire. Almost that kind of instinct arises from that. That is what the Buddha is talking about. Not this sort of coming to an altar and referring, of course, that motivates and helps us. But again, through culture, what have we done? I mean, we have kind of like reduce the respect that we have towards the Panchasila, because it's given as freely as more freely than food is given out at a dansala, right? It is almost in front before each and every occasion. We again too much of supply, right? We give it, so bringing down sort of this sense of respect that we have towards it. So here, whatever disturbances there might be because of the perception of people, there are none here. That perception of people, perception of the village, one of the main things that the Buddha has said, which is conducive to that suffering and that perception of the village and people, is musavacha, pisunavacha, pausavacha, sampappalapa. And the Buddha says this is a root cause of most issues in your life. Often because you have said something that you do not mean, or you have spoken out of greed, hatred, or delusion. You have made a mistake, you have spoken badly, you have spoken ill. Hence, now like that wheel, chakkang vaha vahato padang, coming behind you, now you have to be fearful. Did that person repeat what I said? Is that person mad at me? Does that person know what I told about her or him? All of these. That fear is not something which is conducive to the path. That fear, that doubt is not something which is conducive to the path. It actually weakens you. It doesn't in any way strengthen you. That is why even when a person determines or decides to become a monk, you have to sort all your affairs and come. If you are in debt, you're supposed to solve it, not because the Buddha doesn't want to take, not because of, anything else. It is the fact that the monk is unable to practice or focus on the practice. He's always thinking about this and that and the other, right? Are they going to come find me? Is my life in danger? Will the Sangha get to know? All of these things, that sense of, right? But truly, this sort of gochara ajiva or gochara samma ajiva is very important to a person who is practicing. So whilst your lives might be simple, right, you must also try to sort of get rid of the other things sort of which comes to sort of, so we might not be murderers, we might not be in debt, we might not have sort of affairs in terms like that. However, remember, even the smaller things we must get rid of, right? And this embodiment of the practice does not happen when you sort of go into sort of those lowly vices, such as calling people up and gossiping and all of these sort of very lowly, poorly things, right? Very lowly, poorly things, which is absolutely nasty. And I know as a teacher, as a person, I mean, I don't like to be called myself a teacher, I'm, because, a teacher has a connotation of a lot of ego. However, I think as a teacher and also as a head of a community, I know, everything that is spoken of comes back to me, right? And I might smile at you, but I know what you told about me. I know everything, right? And so just imagine for me to be able to smile at you and say and help you out and to sort of facilitate your growth and development and to think nothing less of you just because you have had a moment of weakness, right? It is also taxing to me as a teacher, right? I am saying that it is taxing because it is not, it does hurt, right? It does hurt. But however, so it does take a lot of energy, it does take a lot of stamina in a way to sort of then look beyond that and just continue doing what you do, right? Continue doing what you do, right? So it is something which hurts a lot of parties. It's very poorly, and it is not something done in a community that tries to live according to a Arya Pratipada, right? Yes, Mala.
Bhante, you're talking a lot of gossip. Is it just vicious thing you're talking about? Because sometimes an old friend calls you and we start talking about the old days, the school days, everything, nothing bad about other people, but sometimes it goes on and on. Does it count as wrong speech? Some up and things?
Okay, good question. This is spoken, and I think we did a sutra in great detail, isn't it? Was it the Brahmajala Sutra, I wonder? it was one of the Digha Nikaya suttas that we did in great detail, which went into all of these sort of wrong types of speech. What is mentioned in the commentary is when it comes to speech, one is able to speak politics, one is able to speak about all of these things, but in relation to what is the discussion and if it is conducive to the reducing of greed, hatred, and delusion. So a practitioner would always, the thing is here, it would always be the attitude. You know, now speaking about, okay, things of the past, you know, things that have been experienced by mutual friends, you know, time in school, you know, how the olden days were and all of these things. If it is conducive in one way or the other to sort of the realizing of impermanence, right? Then that is something that that is then mentioned to be allowable in a way, not because allowable, not in because the Buddha says yes or no, allowable in the sense of does not or is not conducive for the hindrances, right? It is not conducive to the development of hindrances. However, it is always best, right, that we are aware of what our intentions are in the conversation, and because any conversation that you have, any conversation that takes place, even if you take the Buddha, for example, all the conversations that are there, you know, there's politics, there's business, there's Dhamma, there's Anicca Dukkha, but everything in one way or another is sort of taken to the sort of the understanding of impermanent suffering and non-self. Right. So even if the, you know, I think the discussion of olden days or whatever it is, the direct breaking of the sila happens the moment the intention to harm comes along. That is a clear cut. That's very, very weak. That's very, very poor behavior. However, however, that means there is no salvaging that. However, when it is something which is as sort of speaking about the old times, that can be salvaged in a way where you have to, or the person, the practitioner, takes it in a way where it is deducive in a way of impermanent suffering and non-self. You know, so metana, so really it's yoniso manasikara. Really, it's yoniso manasikara, right? And even if you take, for example, you are speaking of a person. You're speaking of a person, and the only reason that you're speaking about this specific person is to help her or him, help the person, right? So even if that person gets to know, you're not afraid, aren't you? You're not afraid. Think about that. You've spoken about a person, you know, the person might be going through something difficult. You're discussing amongst your friends, you know, how are we to help this person, right? Now, that kind of thing, will it bring you fear? Oh, does she know? Right? If it does bring you that sense of fear, it's probably not the right thing. If it does not, it probably clearly, it is something that you, it is something which is not wrong. Right? So really, it is the intention which comes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Anyone has any questions? No? Lovely. All right. Kingsley, yes? No? Okay. All right. Then we will continue the rest of the sutta next week.
Yes.
Yes. So we will discuss the rest of the sutta next week. All right. So thank you very much, and take care, and have a good rest of the week. Right?